Okay, so I'm out here today in the shop thinking about axe handles and what makes a good one. How do you know what to look for in an axe handle? What are a couple of things that you can use to be a little bit more discerning if you're either buying a new axe handle to either rehaft an axe you own, or maybe you got just a great deal on a vintage axe, or maybe you're buying a new axe or a used axe. You know, really, how do you know what makes a good handle? So there are three things I think to consider with an axe handle. The first thing is it's called grain orientation. The technical term is slope of grain. So in what direction does the grain go in relation to call it the transverse plane? Again, that's the technical term. Or you can just call it in relation to the bit. If that grain is directly in line with the bit, it's straight up and down, that is vertical grain orientation. That is called 0 degree slope of grain. That is the ideal, that's what everybody looks for. That is the strongest possible orientation for the grain. The second thing is handle runout. And in my opinion, I think that handle runout is more important than the grain orientation. So if you wonder, well, what is grain runout? I have this handle perfectly exemplifies what I wanted to talk about today. This is white ash. White ash has a much wider grain than hickory. All of these tiger stripes here are grain runout. All of them. And this is the most severe kind of grain runout. Every now and then you'll see the grain on your axe handle and it'll be kind of a wide sloping pattern, cathedral, you can call it. That is nothing to worry about. That is to be expected, and actually in some ways I wouldn't say desired, but it's necessary, because if you want a nicely carved handle, you're going to have some grain runout. But what this means here is that you have the grain, and I'll try to copy the angle here. The grain is running like this, stacked. It's stacked tightly and on top of itself. So that's kind of like, it's shorter grain. The longer the grain, the more it can absorb force, the more it can transfer force. This grain is very short and it's stacked right on top of each other. So this is an extremely undesirable handle in terms of grain runout. And why I picked this axe in particular, I actually like this axe. This is a great axe. It's a limbing axe. It's not a splitting axe. So the chances of having significant overstrike are pretty small, and it's a short axe. But the reason I picked this axe handle is because don't be deceived by grain orientation, because that is perfect grain orientation. Yet when you look at the grain runout, that is extreme. And actually this handle it is even, let's call it more unique, because the if you trace the grain, it starts in the east and it goes to the west. And up here, it starts in the west and it goes to the east. So this handle right here would be extremely weak, extremely susceptible to breaking if you get significant overstrike. Because if you think of, and I can tell you right where it would break. It'd break right here, right up at the top. Because if you think about it, if my arm is a log and I overstrike, an axe is just a lever. You have now converted the log into the fulcrum. The head is all of the weight and the force, not just the weight of the head, but swinging down and immediately stopping. All of that force is going to run down the handle. And ideally, you can think about grain runout like electricity. Best case scenario, if you have a good handle, you overstrike and all of that force goes from the point of impact all the way down the handle through all of the grain. The grain is just like a wire. It goes down through the grain into your arm and it stops in your elbow or your shoulder or wherever it would stop. And you'll have a sore elbow, but that's okay. You'll live to chop another day with your axe handle. But with that grain runout, just like electricity, you do the overstrike, that force runs down and it stops at the grain runout. And now you've got a short because there's no current. So in my opinion, it's not scientific. I have no studies to back that up. I'll put it that way, purely anecdotal. But to me, that's why handles break, because the force cannot transfer in the grain. It finds a weak spot, just like electricity, and it pops, it shorts. Now you've got a broken handle. So I think grain orientation is half the equation. Grain runout is just as important. I think probably more important. And grain orientation was only really talked about in the last probably 15 years because of Major League Baseball. There were a couple of, maybe in the mid to late 2010s, a couple of real bad broken bat accidents. And so the MLB spent millions of dollars studying grain orientation and if it makes a difference on baseball bats. And so now what you'll see is every Louisville Slugger has its logo oriented towards you. And that means when you connect with the ball, that grain orientation is running in the same direction as the ball. And if you flip it on the other side, there's another logo that you can see. On maple bats in particular, it's very important with maple bats. It's like a 30% difference. If the top is painted black, there's, I think it's regulated now by MLB rules that there is a unpainted spot on the baseball bat. So you know, okay, that's going to be facing me so I can see the grain and I can hit. White ash, which a lot of baseball bats are made out of, is a lot more forgiving. It has a lot more bounce. So this might actually be okay in comparison if this were a maple handle. And I have made axes out of maple handles, and they work okay. Not a full-size axe, but hatchets, things like that. It can work okay. So, talked about grain orientation, talked about runout. Let's see here. Oh, the third thing I wanted to talk about, and I need to actually grab that axe. Okay. The third thing is any potential defects in the wood that might inhibit strength or usability, those being primarily knots and bark inclusion. So if you get a knot, especially a big knot that's open, don't buy that axe handle or that axe, and that would be my advice. And if you order it in the mail, I would return that axe for a couple of reasons. Number one, you will never be able to get that knot smooth. You could probably live with it if it's up here. If it's anywhere where your hand would be sliding or pivoting, that is going to be a very difficult axe to use, because that knot will never be smooth. It will always be raised, and it will always be hard and sharp, and it's going to give you blisters like you can't believe. The second reason is you cannot shape a knot. So if you want to thin your handle, if you want to straighten your handle, if you want to do anything to your handle, that knot is going to be a very big obstacle to shaping that handle. The third reason is knots are porous, so it's going to be harder to keep your axe handle nice and treated against moisture. Bark inclusions, and I wanted to show you, a knot is fairly obvious, but this would be a bark inclusion. You see here, there's a little bit up here, a little bit to the sides. This handle is fine, so you can have a bark inclusion that does not impact the quality of your axe handle. I was able to smooth this just fine, so I would say this is probably the very end or the very beginning of a bark inclusion. So this is still good wood here. I'm not bothered by this at all, and nobody should be bothered by this. And what I wanted to say at the beginning of this video, but if you made it this far, thanks for hanging in there. My intent is not to have somebody watch this video, go over to their axe handle or their axe and say, well, now you saying I got a junky axe. Well, no, that's not what I'm trying to say. If you can use your axe handle and you're happy with it, perfect. I'm happy, you're happy. So my intent is not at all to say that anybody with some issues that I'm talking about has a bad axe or a bad axe handle. I'm just purely talking about some things that can impact the quality or durability of your axe handle. So I happen to really like this axe. I use it a lot. This is the Husqvarna Carpenter's axe. It's a fantastic product. I mean, it really is. I've gotten a lot of use out of this, and I love the handle. The handle has taken just a glassy, smooth finish. Nothing wrong with it. That bark inclusion is purely cosmetic. Now, in hickory, it can be, bear with me as I go through puberty here, it can be a lot harder to spot grain runout. You know, grain orientation is always fairly easy. That would be, and this is how I prefer my axe handles. So if you get an axe handle like this, and a lot of people prefer their axe handles like this. Perfectly vertical is great, but I think when you have a slightly sloped grain orientation on your axe handle, it kind of livens up your axe. It turns it, instead of having force just go in one direction, it can kind of almost twist it a little bit, turn your handle into a spring, so it absorbs and it transfers force easier. It can kind of take some of that force before it goes to your body. So that's my theory. I prefer that grain orientation. But here, this is one of my blonder hickory axe handles. If you look on this side of the axe, it's very hard to see any grain run out whatsoever. In fact, this axe handle has no run out. If you want to look at an axe handle that is just technically perfect in terms of run out, this one is it. Now, up at the top, you're always going to see these stripes. You're always going to see that because the shoulder of the axe is thicker at the top and then it tapers down. And what happens when you do that is you are necessarily shaving some of the grain in half, which is going to expose, that's going to be the face grain there. So you're always going to have that. I just wanted to point that out. That is not an issue at all. But this right here is what you would call a technically perfect axe handle. Really no run out whatsoever to speak of. Now, if you do want the strongest possible axe, you are going to want to get yourself a straight axe handle. So this right here is a 5-pound council tool faller's axe. Heck of an axe. You know, good grain orientation. Now, a straight axe is going to have the least possible grain runout. A curved axe versus a straight axe, that's because you are more so going along the plane of the wood. You don't have those variations, those curves. You're going to have a little bit of this curve here, but this is totally straight. This is totally straight. So you are going to be better following that grain pattern, meaning, you know, think of it like a string. If you're going to run a string from one end of the axe to the other, those are all going to be intact and one continuous string. You're going to have long grain. It's like gluing wood together in a way. If you glue two pieces of wood together, full length, 8-foot 2x4s, that's going to be a strong piece of wood. Versus if you take, call it maybe like 2-foot sections of 2x4, and then you stack them along the length. That's going to be a much weaker piece of wood. Grain runout, same thing. So if you do feel like you need the strongest possible handle, go with a straight handle because it will minimize runout. So that's pretty much what I had to say. I think we talked about grain orientation, grain runout. We talked about some of the bark inclusions and knots. I found YouTube to be a pretty cool place. I like it quite a bit. I think it helps when people subscribe. So if you're inclined and get any value from that, I'd appreciate that. I did look at some of my handles, channel statistics. I am 99.5% male in terms of audience, and I thought that was hilarious. Because I mean, if to the 0.5% woman out there, glad to have you. It's awesome. But I think probably that's a little deceptive. I think that was just some guy that's borrowing his wife's phone. So that's cool. That's great. you know, it's awesome. I like the axe community. I like putting stuff out there, and I've certainly got a lot of value and wisdom from other people that have uploaded videos. So I hope you found it helpful. And if you have some thoughts on axe handles, throw them below. And or if you feel like, you know, this guy's just way off base, throw that down below too, because I'd like to read that as well. But again, thanks for watching. All right, we'll catch you next time.